There we go. All right. Okay, so the first thing on the agenda is accepting the minutes for March and April. Does anyone have a motion for that or any changes for either of those? I did send them to you.
I haven't, I don't recall getting a copy of the minutes. Is that,
I sent them a while ago before because we were supposed to do this at our May meeting, but we didn't have a May meeting.
right?
So it was sent out probably, my guess would be a couple of weeks before that meeting, or maybe that
Let me
week.
take a look.
Okay. Why don't we come back to this so we don't have to take too much time? Okay, so old business, the Let's Talk series just finished, and that was a very interesting group. This was what were they, Greg? What, 9 people? I think 9 in this one. Yeah, and we don't know yet about. I know that we're going to hold the last sessions in the fall, probably October. But then we still have that part of the grant that's hanging out there for mediation with the council. The council's changed. Sam is going to take this to them to see if they want to make use of some kind of facilitator slash mediator for their meetings about housing, because they're meeting every other week in a more informal setting to discuss housing. So she's going to see if they want to use it. If they don't, I talked to Christy at the end of our last session, and she said that she would be willing to do a training session to teach people in the community how to facilitate those kinds of conversations. Well, how to facilitate the Let's Talk program. Greg, do you want to say anything about your experience with the program?
Well, I found it very rewarding. It was, it was laid back, and we addressed the material straightforwardly. And in a small group, it's really easy to do. And we learned a lot from each other. And I would recommend taking it if you haven't.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone? Okay, great. All right. So, you know that we participated in the Barre Area Development Corporation. I actually was the Central Vermont Economic Summit. And I had invited MA, is that how you say her name? MA to come because I knew that this was going to be on the agenda. But we have Tracy here representing, I'm assuming, both organizations or just yours?
I'm just here for the partnership.
Okay, great. So the other person who was there with me representing the city's table was Emily, but I don't see her here. She's probably at the same meeting with Sonia. Rick, could you put up the document that's, I forgot what it says. Not the one that says priority, the other one.
Give me 1 second.
Okay. So I just want to kind of show you kind of our critique of the, rather our observations that Emily and I had about that summit and its value to us, because I think that's going to be something we can work on in the future that might be pretty useful. Okay. So this is an anecdotal analysis. I didn't take any data. I don't know if they collected any data actually. Is meant to assist the Barre Area Development Corporation in planning for future events such as this. They did say that this was an annual event that they were intending to plan. And this observation of 2 committee members in attendance, Joellen Mulvaney and Emily Wheeler Reynolds. So I noticed that almost every single table participating were from nonprofit organizations. There was one a local firm, I think, a local firm they were, that was a real estate management firm. The attendees and the tabling participants were predominantly women, which I found very interesting. It could have been because they were pitching this as something that was going to focus on LGBTQ and women's leadership. So perhaps that was the reason. So it might be the themes that they advertised. But it also begs the question about equity and the need to normalize women's leadership. There were not many gentlemen there who were participants. Even the business members who belonged to BADC weren't there. So what does that mean in Barre City? I think that's something we can kind of chew on when we think about equity. Okay, so I'm thinking that the next thing that was talked about between us, meaning Emily and myself, was the question about what does it say about the Barre Area Development Corporation following trends evidenced by those who did attend. So I know that they did send out a questionnaire to folks who had tables, but I'm not sure that they did that for people who participated, which would have been a perfect, opportunity to collect some of that data. Maybe they can still do it because they obviously have a list of folks who attended. I was in 2 workshops. There was one about women in business with 8 attendees, and the other was our workshop that we did for the committee work, the equity work that we're doing. We had 14 people attend. One of the things I noticed about that, and the reason that I have on the agenda how to engage with other organizations that serve the city, I noticed in the workshop that everyone in the workshop, except of course myself and Emily, worked for some organization that was a nonprofit. And they were all extremely aware of equity, had been working on their own, not on their own, but within their own organizations on equity and inclusion. So it made me think that might be a very a good way to collaborate, is if we connect with the nonprofits in the community in some way that are doing, because they're already aware, and maybe they can be helpful in promoting the kind of work that we're doing. Yeah, so that's what that made me think about. Okay, the location and setup worked well, and those who did table brought a variety of materials and information, which was good. You want to scroll because I can't see the bottom. Maybe Rick's looking down. Rick, would you scroll a little, please? Thank you. One more. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I already said that. So I was thinking Emily would be here in case she wanted to add something to this, but let's kind of put a pin in this until we start to talk about how to engage other organizations that serve this.
Emily is here.
Emily. Hello, Emily. So Emily, I was just going over this document that I put out about our reaction to the economic summit. Do you want to add any comments about that? About your experience there?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Sorry to throw that at you like this, but yeah.
No, that's okay. I'm having technical things happening, so.
Oh, okay.
But I'm here. I thought that the summit was great. The first workshop that we were in that was led by the, I'm so sorry. The Mercy Connection, was that the first one that we did? We did a panelist. There was, I thought that was really exciting. There were a lot of women there, and just a great opportunity to talk about business and some challenges that we've all faced. Felt really inclusive and welcoming. And then the presentation that Joellen and I presented, I think we could safely say it exceeded expectation for us, right, Joellen?
Yeah, I would say that. Yes. Yes.
Definitely had more people there than we expected. And the people who were there were so engaged and interested and positive. It was so just like affirming to be in a group of people who were so supportive and on board with the work of the committee when so often we have not had that support from public people. So that felt really exciting to be and affirming of the work that we're doing. And I think we all felt it there in the workshop.
Thanks, Emily. Does anyone have any questions about this conversation? Okay. Yes.
I do.
I'm sorry, you're in a little box. I can't see you. Who is that?
Chris.
Chris, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
It's not a question. I guess it's more of an observation. A long time ago, one of my first jobs out of law school was working for the Office of Minority and Women Business Assistants in Massachusetts. We certified all the minority and women-owned businesses, Spanish businesses for the federal government. And, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And it occurred to me, maybe we could make some kind of inroads with minority. I don't know how many minority-owned businesses there are in town, but there must be a few. And certainly women-owned businesses. I don't know. We had a directory of them for the whole state. I don't know if Vermont does, but it would be interesting to know who's here in Barre and maybe establish a network with them. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, since we're also now charged with the CDC work, it kind of goes in tandem because those are the people that these nonprofit organizations serve as well. So the other part, though, that I can't quite reconcile, and we'll have to work on this, is these organizations are regional. They're not just Barre City. So our purview is not necessarily a regional purview. So we'd have to figure out that piece in terms of, maybe it could be just the city projects that we collaborate on with these organizations. Anyway, thank you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next is that discussion. How do we engage? And Tracy, I would like some help from you because you are an organization in the community, and I'd like to hear about how you perceive our work supporting what you do, and if there could be opportunities to collaborate on projects or on ways of being and doing our work. So I guess I'm just going to put that question out there. Why don't we start with that, if that's okay with you, Tracy?
Sure. As the director of the partnership, I would welcome working with your committee for sure and seeing what I can do to make it more positive and bring positivity to our community. I just, I try to I try to promote as many things that I see in our community. I'm, being one person, I don't see everything, but I scroll, I look through things. When I talk to people and I say, if you want things shared, please message me, please email me, tag me. I just want to get the word out about anything and everything in our community. And, I would gladly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Someone else was speaking. Go right ahead. Sorry.
I would just, welcome the opportunity to work with you and get your feedback on what I'm doing and how I can change things and make things better.
So let me ask uh, members of the committee to see if they have some ideas about, well, we can talk about both, even though MA isn't here, we can still talk about the other organization as well. So to see how we can work with them. Any thoughts among folks out there? Or maybe even some of the issues that we think we could work on together to improve the welcoming and equity and justice in the community.
I will jump in if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
I think one place we could start is presenting our equity assessment tool to our local partners and friends, and maybe that means meeting with the partnerships board and going over that toolkit, talking through it, and maybe that means meeting with the BADC board as well and presenting there. Like, I think that would be a really great place to start, and we could have an opportunity to meet face to face in person with people and build relationships and talk about the intersection of the work that we're all doing.
Thank you, Emily. So does that sound like something that you could schedule for us? Tracy?
Yeah, definitely. We meet the third Tuesday of each month at 9:30. So we do have someone coming next week, but we could schedule for July or August.
Okay, great.
And just to keep in mind, Joellen and the rest of the committee, when you're talking about the partnership or you're talking about BADC, you have a lot of community businesses that are represented on those boards, a lot of other organizations that are represented on those boards. So I think, like what Emily was saying, if you guys got face-to-face time with them, you're not only touching the core group of board members, but the board members are also business owners, and most of them are business owners, I believe, Tracy. So you're connecting with a lot more than just, some board members in one group. You're connecting with a lot of the community too. So I think it would be beneficial.
I agree.
Anyone else have some ideas? Yes.
It's Sonia. I'm I'm wondering if we could if we do have the opportunity to have a meeting with the our community partners, if we could approach it in the same way we approach the Let's Talk series, which is some of the conversations might make us feel uncomfortable. Like, wow, we've never done it this way before, but how can we be curious and work together to make sure more people are feeling included and belong? And I just sort of as a framework for how we go into those conversations to make sure everyone is feeling like it's okay that we might feel like not as like warm and fuzzy about everything, but like how can we work together and talk it through and work together? So I just offer that as a suggestion so that it doesn't feel like we're accusing people or demanding things, or I'm just hoping we can have open and honest conversations. So that's a suggestion. I think having the meeting is a fabulous idea.
Great. Good. Good. And so I guess my question is, we don't all have to go. Obviously, it would be kind of, in a way, it might be counterproductive. So my question to you all, and for you to think about, you don't have to answer me tonight, is who is it that could be the representatives going to these meetings? Because there'll be two, I'm assuming, one for the Barre Area Development Corporation and the other for Tracy's group. So think about that and think about how we can put our best foot forward. I like the idea of Emily of the equity assessment tool, but in a way, that's a planning tool. And while we could certainly present it as an option for people to use, going through the actual tool, I think would require, in a way, its own. Maybe that could be the second time we approach the organization, because it's very specific, which is important. But to have a conversation, a broader conversation about how equity work can be done in our community, I think would be more useful. Does that make sense?
Can I speak to that?
Yes, please.
Is the background noise impossible? Is
No,
it
no,
bad?
that's fine.
I could probably pull over too in a minute. Well, so what we've done in the past with the equity impact assessment tool, yes, we've worked with groups who want to use it and apply it to what they're doing, but we also worked up an introduction that we brought to several different organizations and boards, just to explain what it is, you know, and why. That it's a rubric, that it is something that we can start to get ourselves to think in a more disciplined way about how whatever our project is, whatever our work is, has an impact on inclusion. We think that it's a tool that was developed by the state, and to start thinking in these ways more habitually. So I don't think it's either or. I don't, you know, I agree with you, Joanne, that we wouldn't walk into a first meeting with people and, you know, say, okay, we're going to work our way through this tool. That's not what it is. But I think we did work up sort of an introductory presentation about it. And that may be a way to talk about it that has sort of guardrails around it. It's not like, hey, everybody, let's talk about racism right now. We're just meeting for the first time, but to talk about how we address some of these things. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Ellen. And when that time arrives, however, Ellen, I hope you can pass on the skills and the really the process that you worked up with. Who was it? It was Danielle.
Yeah, it was Danielle and Sveta.
Right, right. 'Cause the rest-
Yeah, I cannot be there, but because I work all day. So, but maybe, yeah, we can make that available.
Right. At some point, you know, whoever it is that's going to be doing that would need kind of a tutorial from you. That would be great. Actually, you know, to tell you the truth, a while ago I emailed when we thought we were doing this with some part of the city. I emailed Danielle, and she said she'd be happy to present that tool, since she has done it before and obviously knows what you three had worked on. So that might be a possibility also. I'm sorry, I have to put my glasses on. So in terms of engaging other organizations that serve the city, maybe after we have a try at working at this meeting with the two city organizations, we could think about that. We could think about how it is that we would, I'm calling it infiltrate in a way, other organizations to plant seeds or to actually work with them on their equity. I did notice, and I checked, and all of the organizations that were represented at that the summit actually have equity committees in their organizations and have been actively training themselves and their staff. So I don't know. It seems like what Emily was saying. It seems like kind of a welcoming place for a change, and that's good for us. Is to have you know, to be working in this positive direction. So Greg, I have you on here. Can we move on? Is that all right for folks? Yeah. Greg, I have you on here for discussing the inequity of flood recovery. Do you want to introduce that topic for us?
Yeah, the idea being that there are some pretty blatant inequities that exist for survivors of the floods. And the idea is that perhaps we as a committee can do something that can assist the city in trying to alleviate some of these. Uh, one of the biggest inequities is, of course, where people have to live sometimes. The more economically disadvantaged live in areas that are prone to flooding and disasters. But that's not unique to Barre or Vermont or anything like that. But the question that came to mind, and it's based on my personal experience being a flood survivor myself, uh, is how can the city do things in a way that will at least put forward specific, efforts towards trying to combat the inequities. Like I want to just I don't want to get into all kinds of details, but uh, some of the things that have been going on is there are people who are still living in places that they really should not be living in because obviously we have a housing shortage, but also they are afraid to think about leaving where they are for fear of not finding somewhere else to live. So, they'll end up homeless is the concern. So they just kind of keep their mouth shut and stay in the situation. Uh, there are, some people who have had to move out of where they lived, and they still have not gotten their, security deposits back. They still never got a clear idea of what exactly their rights were under the landlord tenant laws. Uh, there are the problem with this is not just the obvious, but also when we can't address these issues, uh, we lose people because either there are people who have just left and they won't be coming back. I met a guy. This was back in March, I think, and he said, he and his family just had enough because their floor was still wet, still damp, and this is in March, and nothing was done about it. So, oh, just saw a cat walk by. So, so as I kind of delved into this, and I sent out some links for you all to take a look at whenever you get a chance about the inequity of disaster recovery, and people are trying to address this. Uh, Even FEMA is trying to address this, and they have a long way to go, but they're trying to address it. And what my question open to discussion is what can we do about it? Number one, what can we do to kind of take stock of what exactly survivors have gone through? What exactly did they need that they didn't get? Uh, how do we be proactive and prepare people who lives in these areas? How do we teach them to be ready, more prepared for a disaster like this? Uh, there's a lot that people have to deal with when they get flooded out of their homes, and if we can't take a look at the individuals a little bit, we have to look at things. We had discussed this before, where we kind of need to get a picture of who the renters are, where they are, and what they're doing. And that kind of stuff is important to know. You need to know what cultural differences exist. Is there somebody with a particular disability, that you might run into, that maybe they're blind, or they can't see, or they can't move around, or is there somebody of a particular culture that is just ingrained in them not to trust anything having to do with government, uh, things like this. And the question is, what do y'all think that we can do about some of these things that will assist and maybe even encourage the city to make moves towards addressing this? Any ideas?
Greg, I think that's a great question, and thank you for sending all that information along. What you're talking about is very real, and I'm sure we all saw that during the flood. Even compared to in the communities that were affected, there were inequities. I think one of the things we're doing now is important, right? We're talking about it. And I think that if we're identifying stakeholders and community partnerships, Tracy's here, she was a huge part of flood recovery. Now we have a city councilor here listening to us and participating in these discussions. Are there other stakeholders in our community that we can engage with in these conversations? Like I'm thinking about Barre Up, like their mission seems very closely aligned with this kind of work. So I think a start is conversations, right? And building relationships with the stakeholders, people who saw this firsthand, know this, and want to talk about it.
There've been a lot of
Sorry.
forums, a lot of different forums in the city having various discussions, including obviously city council. But in every meeting I've been at, the question comes up, who's collected the data? Where is that data? Surveys all over the place done. Who has it? Who doesn't? And I've never heard an answer. So I know that for one person, Amanda had been collecting,
Justin.
Justin had been collecting information on this. And I'm wondering if I'll give her a call. I'll contact her and see if she has it. But anecdotal is important, absolutely. Oral history is extremely important, but to be supported by data is really also a key. I'm sure I've heard from the city manager that there are some people we just don't even know where they went. We have no clue. So how do we track these folks down, or how do we, as Greg said, serve the folks who are still living in those conditions? I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead. And then William.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask exactly what you just spoke about, Joellen. Is there data collected by either the city and or the state to show where the money has been going, for flood recovery, and how's it being allocated? I can't, there's nothing I can do about the city, but working for the state, for the, one of the departments that's dealing with this issue, I could see if there is data to, about this. I don't know, to be honest, but, I know I've worked on various projects involving flood mitigation, education regarding flood mitigation, that kind of thing. But there's, concrete projects regarding flood recovery that, like repairing damage, that kind of thing. So I don't know. I will look for it. But I think that would be an important thing. And I don't know if Rick can speak to it, or Sonia as a member of the council. But I would like to know where is the money coming? Like federal money, state money, municipal money, and where's it going? How's it being allocated? That would be my first instinct in terms of acting on this. Thanks.
I can answer a little piece of that. Any of the money that came from FEMA has been tracked by Barre Up. They're the organization that's tied to FEMA. I'm not sure, however, that we got the data that FEMA collected, so that's a good question for them. Thank you, Chris. William.
And I was, one of the things you were mentioning was about renters and homeowners, Greg. And on the Board of Abatement, I heard more than one story about people who were actually still living in homes that would be considered uninhabitable because they had nowhere else to go. Or living in, one story about a person who was had like propane set up so that there would be heat in the house, and did not seem to be a very safe situation, but the people did not have really much choice in the matter. There was nowhere else to go. And so I think not only you have people who were making the best of a horrible situation, but really it was not, they're living under unsafe conditions at this point in time. And I believe some of them still. And so I think that that's certainly something to look at. And obviously it's, when we talk about in Barre about the downtown, it's quite literal. And that's why that's the area that was affected by the flood. And that's where a lot of I think a lot of the low income people live. And so that's why they were most affected by it.
Well, it seems like there was a lot of activity around I call it flood camaraderie. There was a lot of activity, a lot of people collecting all kinds of information, but I'm wondering where the clearinghouse is for all that stuff, all that data, all that information. And also, do you have data, William, about how many people came to you with those stories and how many folks applied for the abatement? And these are obviously people who own, not people who are renting, correct?
Right. I mean, there would be some information on the people who rent because there were rental owners who came to us for abatement. And so we would have some information about I think about the units that they had that became uninhabitable. Some of them will never be inhabitable again. And I think the city should have that information, probably if you reach out to Nicholas. And they would have the information in terms of, we would have information in terms of what was mitigated. And I'm not sure about, there would be brief explanations, I think, of the reason for the mitigation. Like that the building was uninhabitable for a period of time, or was uninhabitable and is expected to remain so. For instance, their buildings on West Patterson Street, where there were landslides and are not expected to be able to build on that area again. And so you can, in terms of that, you can look at the areas where if there was land that was abated, that would mean that it was deemed that the land was not usable for a domicile anymore. Because if the building was not usable, but the land was, or a house could be built on it, then we did not abate the land.
Just the dwelling.
Right, just the dwelling. And so that's something that you could get information by looking at the looking at that information, you could get the information about where the landslides were. And of course, this is only the people who abated.
Right. Right. So William, I'm going to ask you, can I task you with that you would do that investigation and come up with some numbers for us? Would you be able to?
I can try to reach out. Yeah, yeah, you can send, if you send me a reminder on it, I
Okay.
can try to reach out.
And William, if you have any problems, feel free to reach out to me, because
Okay.
what's being talked about touches many different groups.
Mhm.
So when we're talking FEMA, there's many levels to FEMA. So there are property owners that received money from FEMA. As far as I'm aware, the city hasn't received any of their money yet. It's still all being processed and tracked, and I know when we went through Irene, it was almost 5 years before the city got any of the money from FEMA. So
Mhm.
we're not sure when that'll come in. If it's going to come in, we're hopeful it'll all come in, but we're not sure. But there are homeowners that received it. And I can pretty safely say, being involved in department head meetings where we discuss these things, that the city knew that there were more people that should be applying for abatement that just never came forward.
Right.
And we tried everything we could to reach out to people, to send emails, to call people, but they didn't come forward, which was very surprising, because that could be a big help for somebody not having to worry about their property taxes. Even water and sewer bills, they were working on abating some of them for
Mhm.
people. So I think one of the issues that, as this committee, when we're talking about the inequities, I think one of the things that we really need to look at, and like Greg said, if we could figure out the dynamics of the makeup of certain areas, like, are we not reaching out in Spanish and somebody's not an English speaking family? Are we not reaching out in Vietnamese or Chinese? Or, even when I'm doing my posters for my the state required labor posters, now I've got Chinese on there, I've got Arabic on there, and Spanish
Burmese.
on there.
Mhm.
And that could be part of what we look at as a committee, is how do we better communicate with the underserved people? Because the city is always trying to figure out, everybody says, oh, send out an email. Well, not everybody gets email. Well, call them. Well, how do you call them if you don't know their phone numbers? And we
Mhm.
don't have like a good list anywhere. I mean, I know Nicholas is putting together, he just purchased a listserv. So if anybody goes, I don't know if it's up on our site yet, but it's going to be. If anybody goes to the website, they can put in an email address. Anytime something's going on that the public needs to know about, there's going to be a blast that goes out to that email address.
That's a
Because
great
we heard through this flood that people were calling 411 and 511 and whatever the number they were supposed to call, and they weren't getting answers. The information that they were talking to people, but nobody was writing anything down, because they were swamped. 211, I think, is what it was. I can't remember now, but it
Mhm.
failed miserably. And I know we've had Department of Public Safety has come in, emergency management has come in. We've had meetings and talked about what a huge failure that was. And because we were telling everybody, call here to get help because they're coordinating it. They weren't coordinating it. They weren't doing anything with it. They were just writing stuff down and not passing it along to anybody. So we even had people that were trapped in houses they couldn't get out, and we weren't getting the information because we were being told to tell them to call 211 so that it could be tracked. So there was a lot that was learned. I know we've done a huge debriefing already with Vermont Emergency Management, Department of Public Safety. We just are working on another debrief with, it's going to include Vermont Department of Health because of the whole COVID thing. We had, we became a point of distribution, but also trying to make sure that we've got everything coordinated. So if we have to open a shelter like we did in the odd, but it's also a medical issue, how are we going to handle that? Because it's not set up to handle both at the same time. So we're trying to work and plan based on what we've learned. But the money, there's definitely people, William, that I can get in touch with if you need my help. Carol would be a good one for abatement because she keeps really good records about that stuff.
Mhm.
As far
Yeah.
as FEMA goes, I could talk to the finance director because she's tracking all the FEMA stuff. So she'd have a good input on that. So if you need help with that stuff, just give me a call and we'll figure it out.
Well, I could, as far as the FEMA stuff, I have no way of knowing where to go to on that. I'm just basically looking at the abatement, and I can
Yeah.
also tell you that there were people who registered, who signed up for an abatement and dropped it because
Yeah.
some of them felt that the city needed the money more than they did.
Oh, boy.
Eh, and there were other reasons why people dropped them, but
I know I heard from two people that dropped theirs, and it wasn't because of any other reason other than they were given misinformation by somebody.
Mhm.
And somebody told them information that was not even close to where it needed to be. And so they were like, well, I'm not going to bother then. And they just stopped. And
and
I know Carol had mentioned she heard that too from some people.
and the
And
other thing is that people can still abate.
yes,
We can, there's no statute of limitations in terms of abating. You
yep,
can call for an abatement for years.
Great.
We look at it a little differently when you've waited that long, but people can certainly still call for abatement. The city would not get the money back from the state like they were doing prior to, I think it was April 15th.
I think that's what it was.
Ellen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanna sort of redirect the conversation a little bit. So I think what Greg is talking about, and you can tell me if I'm barking up the wrong tree here, Greg, but is housing justice, right? Is the terrible lack of protection that tenants have in our city. I mean, in many places, but in our city is what we're talking about. There are a small number of people owning a whole lot of properties, a lot of rental properties. There's no code enforcement. There's no, there's very little protection for tenants. And if you're part of a marginalized group, if you're poor, you have even less power and less protection. And when a flood like this comes along, you're the first out, and you're not coming back. And we don't have data about who these folks are. And there's not a lot of connection for folks to the community. And so it is just a perfect storm, to use a metaphor that is pretty apt here, right? We're talking about abatements. Those are for owners. Those are for owners. And I'm not arguing that owners don't need abatements on a property they can't do a lot with. But it's a different category altogether. It's people with very little power who are living in the lowest spots, in the historically most polluted spots in our city. And we don't have tenant protections. I mean, I came from a place in Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that had decades of rent control, that people were enfranchised. People like myself could actually have an apartment who weren't making a large income and live in neighborhoods of mixed income, in healthier neighborhoods, because those prices were controlled. And there were protections, there were codes that needed to be kept up. You could withhold your rent if you weren't getting the services you were supposed to get as a tenant, if your landlord wasn't fixing things. There were a lot of protections. And owners and, large owners and real estate folks made sure they had a multi-year, decades-long campaign to get rid of that rent control. And they finally did by taking it to a statewide vote. So we had people in Western Mass and Central Mass, far away from places where there were rent control, being able to throw away rent control. So the struggle is real. Home ownership and property ownership is a business for a lot of people, and there's not a lot in our city that's protecting tenants. So I just want to widen this conversation out to that. I think this is about housing justice in Barre, and how to make Barre a more inclusive place would to have rights for tenants.
Thank you, Ellen. Sonia?
Yeah, that is pretty much what it expands to. Putting some kind of protections in place, perhaps, or some kind of systems that allow people to, have an outlet that they can rely on, is an important thing. One of the things that's happened is because of some of the failures that happened, people have discounted any help that they may possibly be able to get from, the city or state, and they're like, well, they didn't help me when, and then they don't want to help me. And that's a problem, because that's how we end up with people getting into situations where they may be living somewhere that they are getting sick and they don't even know it, because of mold or any other airborne whatever they may be exposed to. And we, as a society in general, that's the kind of thing we should not tolerate the least bit, because everyone deserves a safe place to live, especially if they're paying rent. So, as we look at this, it is a housing justice issue, and it's multifaceted, but I believe that there's, actions that can be taken, and unfortunately and fortunately, everything will likely to involve FEMA, and FEMA is an interesting organization. That's all I can say about them. But I was pleased to learn they have some policies in place to adjust, the inequities of their own programs. But as we saw in this area, and there were probably like I think at least 4 families that were looking forward to being moved into the FEMA homes that they were going to move in. And for those of you that don't know, FEMA was constantly calling everyone and giving them bits of information about, and asking them questions about, do they want this? Are they going to need this? And then and people were waiting, and then all of a sudden it was not going to happen. That obviously is not something the city can do about that, but it's something to keep in mind, that people who experience something like that have no time for government agencies or whatever. They just dismiss them. So that's a little battle within the fight that, has to be addressed.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg. Sonia?
Thanks. A couple of things that I'm hearing, and I hope can be brought up with the city council, and I probably should just do a disclaimer here. I'm no longer part of the committee as a voting member. I'm the liaison. I haven't even, hasn't even been made official yet, but I think I'm the liaison from the council to the committee. I think there's going to be a liaison from one counselor on every committee. So I say that so that you understand, I'm not participating in votes, but I will be participating in meetings if that's okay. And so I think what I'm hearing is a couple of things, and one is, how do we communicate with the underserved? I think that was what Rick said, and I think that's an interesting question, and I wonder how we can do a better job at that. And then code enforcement, I mean, I'm very, very new at this, but I think I would hope that we have ordinances and codes that are on the books, but maybe just not being enforced, and we need to do a better job at that. And when I think about tenant protection and the conversation about where's the data and where have the people gone who were most impacted, I am interested in that. And at the same time, I also would say, how will having that data help us to be able to craft a plan? Or do we need the data to be able to craft a plan to be able to move forward and make sure we are serving everyone in our community? Because we may not ever be able to get our hands on the data. I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't seen data. But I wonder if with or without the data, what can we do, or what can this group do? What can the city do to make sure that we are protecting tenants, we are protecting the underserved, the people who are the most vulnerable in our community. And maybe that looks like doing a better job at connecting, creating those relationships, creating community, and making sure that someone isn't feeling unsupported and unconnected or disconnected, I guess is the word. And I'm not even sure what that exactly looks like, but I just say that as sort of, this is where we are. This is, what we didn't do correctly, or we could have done better, but how can we use that information to make sure we do better now?
Thank you, Sonia. Rick?
So I just wanted to touch base real quick on the code enforcement. So they just had a huge meeting, I believe it was Tuesday, with code enforcement, the state fire marshal, the electrical inspector, all of our people were there. Plus, I think there was more than 20 landlords that were there. I ran into two people the other day. I happened to be out looking at some trees that were overhanging one of the roads, and one of my duties as interim is also tree warden, so I had to investigate that. And I had a gentleman come out of the house, out of an apartment. It wasn't in the north end, and told me that he can't use the bathroom in his apartment anymore because the building has shifted so much that the toilet is at like a 30-degree angle and it's not connected to the pipes anymore. And a lady came out of the same building and told me that her daughter, who's pretty young, has lead poisoning. And when it was brought up to the landlord sent her a gallon of paint and a paintbrush and said, paint over it. So I picked up my phone and I called code enforcement. And I said, what's going on here? And they have gone in, they had an engineer go in, they have said the building is no longer rentable. The problem is the next step. So you've got a gentleman in this building that is obviously he's older gentleman, and he said to me, I have no place to go. I know I can't rent this. The landlord's from out of state and just doesn't care. And he said, I don't have any place to go. So what am I going to do? And so I reached out to Brooke, our public, can't remember Brooke's exact title, but she basically coordinates resources to say, can you go talk to this person and see what you can do? The other lady told me, I'm moving out. I found another place, just because I'm sick of dealing with this landlord. Code enforcement has some teeth, but not as much as you would think. I've seen them fighting in court over illegal dumping. And, it's how basic is that? But it's gone to court, and so they have some abilities and they push their abilities as far as they can push them. In regards to what Sonia was saying, I don't know what came out of this code enforcement meeting other than the state fire marshal found some violations on our building. So I got to deal with those. But it's definitely something that if you guys want more information, I can talk to our code enforcement officer, who's also our fire marshal, and they can give you a much more detailed explanation of where their boundaries are because of ordinance or state statute, things like that. They have teeth, but they don't have a lot of strength. So I completely understand what Ellen is saying in the fact of, how do we deal with this? And I know they're trying to deal with it, and they're trying to put pressure on the landlords to bring these buildings up to code and to make sure everything's safe for people. But they only have so much authority under ordinance. So
Ask this question though, Rick, aren't there fines related to some of these things? Why can't they be fined?
they are,
In the ordinance,
and then they'll pay the fine. So if my fine is $150 and I've got a building that's uninhabitable, fine, I'm getting the rent from those people. Send me the $150 fine, I'll pay it and then get off my back. Which doesn't fix the problem. All it does is it's not enough teeth from what I can see when it comes to landlords. Now, there are landlords that are outstanding. And if you walked in and said, you need to fix this, you need that, they're going to get it done because they want it up to code. They want to be in compliance. I will say that in the past, we've had some people that may have let a lot of things slide that shouldn't have. But the two individuals that are doing it right now are very good and they're very thorough and they're trying to change the things that have been slid in the past. So I have no problem reaching out to them to see if they would come in if we ever want to talk to them.
Sonia, before I call on you, my investigation into that, because I've looked at the codes, they're certainly there. They have not been followed in the past. You're absolutely right. And now we have new people on the job who are way more enthusiastic about what they're doing, and they're actually going to hopefully do something. But in that code, it does say that all apartment buildings need to be inspected annually, and apartments need to be inspected before they're re-rented to somebody else. I don't think that has ever been done by the previous code enforcement person. So we have a backlog now because that hasn't happened for the past God knows how many years. Landlords have not thought about it. The ones who are not conscientious, they were like, oh, they're not even going to inspect. So why should I care? Or what would it matter? Things. I'm hoping.
Even expand on that, Joelle, to even expand on that, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe code enforcement relies on the rental registry to know who's renting property. So if somebody is renting an apartment in their house or renting bedrooms in their house or something, and they don't report to the rental registry and pay their whatever it is every year, $50 or whatever, code enforcement may not know about it. So that's another piece of it that they're trying to work through is how do we better get a grip on all the landlords that are renting that aren't telling us they're renting, and then we can go inspect.
Right.
So that's another piece of it.
Right, thanks. Sonia.
So I have a question, and Rick, maybe you can help me answer this. But I would assume I have two questions. If a renter has a problem because they think something is unsafe, hasn't been taken care of, can they call code enforcement? How does that work?
So code enforcement, you can call them, or there's also a form on the website you can fill out.
Okay.
And then they will reach out to you and they will come in and talk to you and figure out what's going on and go right through and check things out.
And how would someone know about that if they, you know, like,
Didn't
let's
speak
say you,
English?
well, if they didn't speak English or just don't know that there is such a thing as code enforcement. I would imagine there might be some people who don't realize that there's someone who they could reach out to get help from and support.
And I would agree. I believe there's a lot of people that don't understand that. You know, the city used to have what was called the Housing Board of Review. And a renter could take a landlord to that Housing Board of Review and, you know, say you moved out and you left everything in your apartment perfect. And then the landlord said, I'm not going to give you back your security deposit. You could go to the Housing Board of Review and they had the legal authority to say, landlord, you know, we've seen the pictures, everything was good. You owe them this amount. That's probably 5, maybe 8 years ago, that went away. So we don't have that anymore. But code enforcement, I would agree. There's a lot of people that don't know about it. And the people that I talked to at this particular apartment building, they knew about it. They were working with code enforcement. But all code enforcement can do is send fines until it gets to a place where they say, this is no longer inhabitable. And then they can shut it down and basically make it not livable. But like Greg was saying, where does the person go now?
Yeah.
You know, if they don't have the financial resources to find another apartment, and there's not a lot of them and they're really expensive,
Mm.
where do they go?
Right.
And that's the part I think that, because there are a lot of buildings, like Greg was saying, there's a lot of buildings that probably should be condemned. And people don't want to say anything because they've got nowhere else to go. And it's not like the city says, oh, you know, well, here's 50 brand new apartments. We'll put you up in one of them and we'll get you out of this mess that you're in. Because there isn't. There's just no place for people to go. And I think that's the side of code enforcement of, you want to push and you want to push and you want to get it fixed. But if you push too hard and they say, forget it, we're just not going to rent anymore, now you're reducing places for people to live. So it's a gray area to figure that all out.
I get that. I wonder if I know the Vermont OSHA, you know, VOSHA
Yep.
had a program where you could have them come in and go through your business to say,
Project Work
hey,
Safe.
yeah, Project Birth Safe, to say, you know, hey, you have these potential areas, you want to fix this up, not to come in and give you a fine, but to be able to make sure your workplace was safe and you could have
That's
these
that,
audits. And I wonder if we
that's what
could do something like that.
so code enforcement does that. They will go into
Okay.
an apartment and they will give the landlord an entire list of everything they find. And then they give them like a time period, 30 days. I don't know what that is, but they give them a time period to get those things remedied.
Okay.
And they're pretty understanding. You know, if you said, hey, you need to upgrade your electrical system and it's going to cost them $50,000, they're not going to say, we got to get it done in 30 days. They're going to
Right.
say, okay, we'll work with you as long as you're working on getting a vendor. Maybe we phase it. However, they're very good about trying to work with landlords. But if you've got an outlet right next to a sink that doesn't have a GFI, they're going to tell you, get an electrician in here within 30 days and get that fixed.
Yeah.
If you don't have smoke detectors, they don't have carbon monoxide detectors, those things are going to be like on the list. And they do have a time period, but once that report is filed, there's an infinite amount of time before the landlord has to meet those requirements.
Okay.
And obviously there's always people that push back and say, well, we can't do it, we can't find an electrician, whatever. And they are understanding of it to an extent, but they also know the landlords. I mean, they could probably off the top of their head tell you, they won't, but they could tell you every landlord they know that's going to be a problem.
Mhm.
Because they deal with them all the time.
Okay.
And that's they are trying to turn it around, and they do have some power, but I've seen it be pretty limited when it comes to a landlord that really wants to fight and not do anything. And in this case, the engineer said the building's falling down, they can't live there anymore. So then
It
they
sounds
basically said no rent.
it sounds like we need to make those ordinances have, you know, basically different steps. And we just can't keep finding them, you know, basically a slap on
That's
the wrist, because that's not enough to encourage them to actually do something.
correct. And I think, honestly, I think, you know, Sonia, and I'll offer this to you, if you want I could set up a meeting with the fire marshal, code enforcement guys, and you could
Mhm.
sit down with them and say, hey, these are my concerns.
Yeah.
You know, as a counselor, you have that ability. And so, and then obviously they'd come in and talk to a group anytime. You know, that's what they're there for. And they just want to see things be safe.
Yeah.
And, you know, they've got a lot of work ahead of them and they're swamped, but they also take it seriously. So, which in the past has not always been the case.
Yeah, I'll reach out to you. Thank you, Rick.
Yep.
Ellen, did you want to say anything? You had your hand up.
I did and I didn't. I think this is just really good food for thought, I think, for our committee. I'm excited about the idea. I didn't even know there was one of a housing board of review. That sounds like something that we would like to look into, about how something like that can be revived, because that's a place for tenants. I'm not sure how effective tenants can be when calling code enforcement on their landlord who has the power to evict them. But something else that really ensures the rights of tenants and hears them and actually can rule, sounds really like something I'd like to investigate further. But I do realize that it's getting late in our meeting, and so I didn't want to belabor this.
Well, let's take the last few minutes. Let's move on, if it's okay with everyone, to the priorities list. The newly elected mayor, Lozone, had invited council members to come up with a list of priorities, and I was at the meeting when they talked about that. And I thought that would be a good idea for us. Not a priority for us, but with our kind of equity lens, if we could think about things that we might prioritize for the city, not that we have to do this, but that it could be things that really need to get done. And I think I sent this out to you all. I started a list of things that I could think of. And we can add to this if you will.
Can you make that bigger, Rick? Is that possible?
I can do that.
Great, thank you.
Not smaller, bigger. Come on, computer.
There we go. Okay. So one of the things I have noticed in the north end of this, in the north part of the city, which is where I live, I usually don't go onto Main Street to get out of town. I go down Farwell Street, but because they're repaving it, I now go the other way. And I noticed an awful lot of dust, and it's not regular dust like the granite dust that we see all over the place or dirt. It's probably the residue. I'm pretty sure it's the residue from the flood. And I know that we have one sweeper and he goes out all the time, but there must be some way to either rent a couple of machines or something that we can do to remove all the remaining toxic dust. I think what happens is the rain comes and washes the rest of the dust into the street again, and there it is. So that's why I put that on the list. Increase in municipal revenue with tiered fees for city services. I think the way that I was thinking that this would connect with equity is that that would be a relief if we could think about ways that the city could increase their income. That could help with property taxes for folks. And certainly if there's going to be a playground, it should be a park or playground that is ADA designed. I don't think we have a single one. I mean, the open fields certainly are, but I don't think we have a playground that is ADA. Reduction in noise pollution, that might not even cost money. I mean, when I first moved to Barre, there was a person on the front of the train who would hop off at every intersection, every time they crossed a road, and stop traffic. There was no whistle. And because we're also ADA right now, I am thinking about things that the city could do that would help with families who have neurodivergent children and or are neurodivergent adults in the community who are affected by noise in a negative way. Obviously, flood mitigation. And organizations and groups that benefit from the tax dollars that serve city resident interests including community activities as well as commercial interests. So I think what we were thinking about there was a more of a balance with the attention paid to residents and commercial interests. And this is where meeting with the Barre Area Development Corporation and Barre Partnership could really help. I mean, we could figure out that. I had on the list also rent control or some other device to protect renters from unregulated rent increases or regular rent increases. So I know that I believe it was brought on the state level. I'm not sure it's legal for a municipal entity to create rent control. That's something that certainly should be looked into. I know that the state did not take it up this year. There was a bill that would have made it possible, but I don't think it made it through. So one of the things that the older CDC committee talked to me about when I was trying to find out how they dealt with doing the report, the ADA report, was that I think it was Byrne who did the exercise of wearing a blindfold and walking down the street to find what there might be in terms of barriers. And so removal of sidewalk barriers could be important. She was talking about the open flags and the sandwich boards that can get in the way of someone who is not seeing well as they try to navigate the streets. No reduction in services, recreational or otherwise, to children of the city. So we know that we don't have a recreation director. Doesn't mean we don't have recreation, but certainly without a director, it makes it very difficult for that recreation committee to serve all the city's children. So an immediate rehire of the director of recreation. Now I know, Rick, that we can't do that until the end of their contract, which I believe is August. So
I don't believe that is in the plan. I think if anything, we'd hire a recreation person, but not a director because they have no staff. The rec department doesn't have any staff. And there is no rec committee anymore.
What happened?
Everybody dropped off. I think there's 2 people left and they don't have enough to have a meeting.
Kidding me?
No.
I didn't know that. Why isn't this public knowledge?
It is. It's on the website. They haven't had, I can't remember when they had a meeting last. It was well before Stephanie left, they had a meeting. I think a lot of it fell apart when they started combining committees, like when they gave ADA to diversity and equity and when they did buildings and facilities, and then they had like a parks and playground that got merged with recreation, and I think a lot of it just fell apart at that point.
So Rick, what are they intending to do?
For committee?
For
or
committee
for
person to
for recreation, or I'm not sure what you mean by what are they planning to do for recreation?
both who would be organizing it, who would actually
Well, right now Don and I, the assistant city manager, and I are dealing with recreation, where I'm dealing with like the playground stuff, I'm dealing with the parks, the ball fields, all that. She's dealing with the pool, and getting we got the pool facilities, got the pools up and running, but she's dealing with the new lifeguards, and Nicholas is helping out with that, trying to get training for lifeguards, because we have a lot of people interested in being lifeguards, but they're not certified and there's no certification courses. So he just set up a certification course for them. So it's kind of a shared role right now. My guess is that it'll fall under buildings and community services director, like Jeff or Steph were both those. One was assistant director and one was a director, but I don't believe the goal is to have 2 directors when recreation doesn't have any employees.
know what
You can't be a director without anybody to direct.
what's the plan for the future? You're not I mean, there's no way you can sustain that and
No, they're gonna hire somebody to do buildings and community services, which would incorporate recreation and cemeteries. But that's the process that right now it's a shared workload because we don't have anybody for that role.
Right.
Joellen? Could this is Sonia, could I interject? I'm not sure if you can see my hand because we're tiny little boxes now. Any of the openings on the committees, we were encouraged to try to get more people to apply. And so, I would just put it out to this committee. You may know people who might be interested in the rec committee, or anybody who's listening that's a community member that wanted to be a part of the rec committee. You could apply to be on that committee. I think because we don't have, that committee isn't full, I think it's kind of a rolling application at this point, I think.
Yes.
Don't quote me on that, but I think that's how it's happening. And so there, Kat Allen and Haley Perro, I think, are the only two on that committee right now. And Kat came to a city council meeting and was encouraging people to apply to be on the committee to make it so that they could at least have a quorum and have meetings.
Okay. All right. So the next thing on this list is create policies and procedures that place residents' interests first. And then greater attention paid to climate change and its effect on the environment, public safety, and equity. So this is just a beginning of what I'm thinking, and I'm asking committee members if they would please add to this so that we have a more comprehensive list, or a list at least that includes other people's ideas. We don't have to do that tonight, but I will resend this list to everyone, and if you could look at it and add things to it and send it back to me, I can bring it back to the next meeting, and then we can present it to the city council to add to their list of priorities. Not that we're asking them to do everything, but just showing them that there could also be a companion list of priorities that looks at more from the perspective of equity.
So the only thing I would recommend, Joellen, on this is I understand ADA is part of this group now, but as the ADA coordinator for the city, I would say that would be a separate list, because I have a list that's like 3.5 pages long of ADA issues that we need to deal with. So, I mean, these things are on there, but their stuff is simple as ramps going into businesses, crosswalks, signal lights that don't have audio. I mean, there's hundreds of little things that are all on my list that are going to be put into the transition plan. So by law, we have to have a transition plan, and by law, we have to have I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. Basically a transition plan. Oh, and a self-audit, self-evaluation. So we have to do a self-evaluation, and then from there we have to do a transition plan. Transition plan breaks out every single item that we can identify, and then puts a cost and a timeline to it. And we were required to have that 20 years ago, and we've never done one.
I know. So Rick, could you please, once you complete that list, send that out to each of us?
Yep.
I would appreciate that. And that reminds
It's never complete. It's a work in progress, because things pop up every day.
that reminds me, Sonia and I sat in front of the polls, and when we were sitting there, we watched several people with serious mobility issues struggling to get into the building. So maybe we should talk about that at some time, how to make the handicap accessible area more visible. I don't think they even knew. They probably have been voting that way forever and didn't even think to go around to the side of the building where the entrance is. So maybe that could be something that,
yeah, that's something that's pretty easy to fix. We had a graduation there last night, and I was still there because I was dealing with some other issues, but I happened to see a lady pull up in a car, like in front of the doors to go in, and the doors weren't unlocked.
Oh.
So I ran over, because I was out there, I unlocked the doors, and then I unlocked the back door to get to the elevator, which should be unlocked anytime there's a show. And then I had a meeting with my team this morning and said, anytime that we have anything that the public is attending, those doors have to be unlocked.
Right.
So I'm going to continue to monitor that, but yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be dealt with.
Before the next election that comes up on, what was it, the 8th?
18th of June. I don't know if I can get signs made that quick, but I can try.
Put a sandwich board out there on the left
Right on
side,
the sidewalk?
the left side of the odd, because I just think people don't know that the entrance is around the side,
Right.
to the building. Or
Yeah.
even, it would even help if the other thing that happened was when they got up to the platform where the doors were, two of the first doors were locked, and it was only the third door that was open. There was no signage. So if you could make a sign big enough for people at the bottom of the stairs to see that these doors are locked, at least they won't walk up and then have to.
I think
Yeah.
you should touch base with me because I'm not sure where you're talking about. Are you talking about the ramp around back?
No, I'm talking about the front stairs to the building, to the auditorium building.
Oh, because they didn't go to the doors on the right, you mean?
She's
Yeah.
talking about two separate things. She's talking
Okay.
about two separate things. One is for people who could use the elevator and go around to the right. And the other is that two of the three doors were locked and people didn't realize it and went to the first door and it was locked. And then they had to get to the second door and it was locked. And then they went to the third door and that was unlocked. But in the
So that's-
meantime, they were very unstable and we were worried they were going to fall as they went from door 1 to door 2 to door 3.
So that's a change that I will bring up to the city clerk. The city clerk gives us the floor plan and tells us what doors they want open. Just
can-
like last night, Barry, no,
The career center, wasn't
Career
it?
Center. The Career Center only wanted the middle doors open. They didn't want the side doors open. So that's what, they're the ones renting it. That's what we do. So we can talk about putting signage on that door that says, please use center door. But I know even in the parking lot, there's some trip hazards that I'm trying to get addressed. But it's potentially either pulling granite out and making it flat, or right now, if you get out of your handicap vehicle, you've got to go into the dirt parking lot off the paved portion to get to the handicap crosswalk. So that's kind of pointless to me. So it's one of the things on the list is to either remove the granite curbing so that they can go from their vehicle onto the crosswalk, down to the crossing and cross to go to the elevator. So yeah, there's a lot of issues up there that have never been addressed.
I got it.
And the handicap ramp out back is not ADA compliant. So if
No.
anybody's thinking it is, it's not. That's why the sign is below that with an arrow pointing towards the door for the elevator, because the ramp is not the correct angle.
And there's always a truck parked there, so you can't get in that door.
Yes, there's not supposed to be when there's a show. So that's one of the other things I talked to him about this morning.
All right, Ellen?
Yeah, it's becoming a little, maybe starting to have a glimmer of how this committee could support the work that has to happen for the city to become ADA compliant. Obviously, it's not our work to make that happen because we're not professionals, we're volunteers in the community. But we can think about how to make, Rick can do all this incredible stuff and will, I'm sure. But if it's not communicated, and let me put it in a positive way, our committee can think about how this gets communicated in the most welcoming and belonging and inclusive ways. So that, there's this idea of universal access and universal design, right? So that it's not like, oh, you people with a disability, you have to go over there, but we design for everyone, right? And I'm not saying that Barre City is going to get there anytime soon, but communication about this stuff is something that this committee could look at. Like, how do we communicate that that's what we're doing and that's what the intention is with all this great work that's going to happen here? And just even reckoning with how it isn't great is a good first step, right?
Yeah,
so
it's never been identified.
yeah, and so that's like, without that, we've got nothing, right? But
Right.
Got a long way to go, but communicating it to the public, getting them used to the idea that this isn't like weird special extra stuff we have to do. This is how we be inclusive as a community. Is, I think, good work. And I don't, I'm probably like everyone else here, would like our meeting to end soon, so I don't want to make this go on any longer, but let's put that like in our minds for future meetings as we wrestle with how we help with the ADA compliance.
Thank you, Ellen. That's a good idea. And taking your suggestion, would someone like to bring a motion? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Oh, dear. We have to,
Visitors?
we have to do the two,
Comment.
the minutes, right? Oh, sorry.
Minutes and public comment.
And public comment, right, but let's do the minutes first, if we can. So, how about the minutes for March and April? Were there any changes to those minutes from anyone?
Could those be posted? So I know it's,
Could those be posted? What are you saying?
I haven't found the email. I didn't see an email where they were sent to us. Maybe I'm missing it.
Well, I actually did send them to the city address that I was supposed to send it to, and I haven't seen it put up on the website yet. I don't know why. I can redo that, but that means we'll have to wait until the next meeting to do this. So,
Yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe we can send them with the agenda so that we can look at the minutes so that we can see them prior to the meeting.
okay, I will.
I'll have to look into that too, because I know some committees won't post their draft minutes, they'll only post the approved ones. So I'll have to find out what's right and what's wrong, because that I don't know.
Okay, fine, that's fine. And I actually do send these things out to you all the time. I'm sorry if I sound a little frustrated, but it's frustrating. What can I tell you? So let's look for a motion to adjourn.
Well, I think we were waiting for public comment
Public
first.
comment.
That's right. I guess we are. So, public comments from anybody? I see a couple of folks here from the community. Do either of you want to say anything? Okey-doke. I guess we can.
Vote to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. All right, see you next month. Bye. Thank you, Tracy, for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I'll be in
And
touch.
Joellen, if you want to send me, just send me a note in terms of what you're looking for me to get for information.
I made a note, and I'll do
Okay.
that. Bye, everybody.